On the night Maya thought she was celebrating love, she uncovered betrayal in the most public way possible. But exposing her husband was only the beginning. Because when the lies unraveled, so did a dangerous secret, one that followed her long after the divorce papers were signed. And just when she thought the nightmare was over, a single photograph arrived, proving someone was still watching. My 31st birthday had been a small thing, a quiet milestone I wanted to mark with the same private intimacy that had felt like our marriage once. I spent the morning with the dress I knew made him look at me the way he used to, soft, surprised, like the world had just revealed a small miracle. I curled my hair the way he'd once said he liked, dabbed on the perfume he'd bought me during years when money was closer than it was now, and rehearsed nothing at all. I wanted the evening to be ordinary in its tenderness. The two of us, a table, candles, proof that the life we'd promised each other still existed. At 3 p.m., his voice came over the phone as if from a rehearsed script. "Maya," he said. My new name for him never would replace the one I'd learned to answer. "Something's come up at work. Last-minute client. I'm going to have to go out of town. Don't be mad. I'll make it up to you." The words were clipped in a way I recognized as practiced. He had always been adept at practice. I didn't shout. I didn't let the phone slip to the counter and cry. Instead, I let the silence do its job. That was enough to make him hang up fast. It should have been enough for me, too, but something steadied in my chest, an acidic knowledge that unspooled memory after memory in a single breath. 2 weeks earlier, my phone had pinged, a credit card alert for the downtown hotel. The receipt read like a small betrayal. 2 nights, a charge for champagne. When I confronted him about it, he'd laughed too quickly and said it was a client comp through him, nothing to worry about. He didn't know I'd checked the dates. One of those nights lined up with the time he'd said he'd been stuck in traffic until nearly midnight. I felt the room tilt. For months, I'd patched doubt with explanations. That afternoon, doubt had teeth. I did what I always swore I wouldn't do in stories, what every bone that had been embarrassed for me swore against. I called a ride, drove the 40 minutes into the city, and sat in the hotel lobby as if I belonged in that velvet chair forever. The air smelled of polished wood, travel-worn cologne, and a kind of confidence that had once enticed me. Men in suits passed through like punctuation marks. Women in evening gowns dragged bags. I sat very still, hands folded over my purse, heart hammering, but face a practice mask. I didn't have to wait long. The elevator chimed, doors parted, and he stepped out, tie crooked, a tired smile trying to look sincere. Behind him, so close it felt like the room split, was a woman half a head shorter than me, hair the color of late summer wheat, laughing in that way women laugh when they've already decided a man belongs to them. She looped her arm through his as if she'd paid in advance for the privilege. For a second, he was just a man adjusting his tie. Then she said his name, soft and possessive, and his face did the thing I had come to expect. Surprise, then the taxicab panic of being caught. His hand left her waist like a release. The lobby's steady hum halted in 100 micronotices. I didn't scream. I didn't make a spectacle. I stood and walked toward them, my heels casting small, glove-like echoes on the marble. "Caleb," I said. His name found me before I did. It came out measured. He stiffened like a puppet with a cut string. "What are you doing here?" He fumbled, tried to pull the rigid cloth over his mouth, and manipulate the truth. "Maya, this isn't," he began. "Out for business?" I asked, the words thin and sharp. Heads turned. A receptionist stopped with a pen midair. The bartender peered over his station. A man checking in with his teenage son straightened like the lobby was an audience, and we were a play. The woman beside him flushed, but kept her hold on his arm, as if admitting the truth would make her vulnerable to 100 collective eyes. "You don't have to do this here," she whispered to me, as if I were a shamed actor who might agree to be complicit. "Actually, I do," I said, and let my silence finish the sentence. I planted my open palm against his cheek, and the sound of it seemed to crack the polished air. He went so still for a moment that his body looked fragile, a surprise in a man who'd lived by charm and deals. The woman's hand flew from where it had been, like a child letting go of a toy snatched too quickly. For every lie, I said. For every night I stayed awake waiting. For every promise you buried under your ambition. People began to lean. The lobby parted for me like a slow tide. I didn't stroke the wound of the moment with tears. I let the humiliation be public and precise. Then I turned and left, not because I wanted to be cruel, but because something cool and clinical came alive in me at that very instant. This wasn't simply an unfaithfulness, it was a ledger, and I intended to balance it. People imagine dramatic breakups happen in one thunderclap. They rarely do. The cracks had been there since the beginning, a hairline fracture widened by ambition and time. When I'd met Caleb, I was 22 and naive in the particular bravery of youth. He promised futures lit with growth and power. He wore the future like a tailored suit. He asked me to move with him to the city, to leave my family, my fledgling marketing job, to invest in the life he sold as inevitable. I believed him. I tied my faith into a suitcase and moved. I learned to tuck the small disappointments away. Late nights turned into weeks. Promises to start a family became vague someday. When the money is stable, he'd say, and I would whisper forgiven things to myself like truth. I lent him money. I used part of my grandmother's modest inheritance to secure the down payment on our house. I told myself love was the same as sacrifice. But signs accumulated like rust. A scent on his shirt I didn't own. Business trips on anniversaries. Messages that arrived at midnight were explained away as client check-ins. Once you start reading the bank statements with intent, you find the map of every choice a person has made. The Marriott alert was only the most recent breadcrumb. The image that finally set me moving was a rooftop photo my niece found. Caleb leaning toward a blonde at a bar. That smile he used to reserve for me, now turned into a private currency. When my sister called me, her voice was flat and steady. "You deserve to know," she said. The grief hardened into something else in me. I stopped asking whether he'd betrayed me and began planning how I would respond. I didn't erupt the way people expect. I didn't break doors or throw plates. I sat in the kitchen at midnight, the house breathing around me, and methodically cataloged everything. Accounts, deeds, titles, things I'd trusted him to handle. For years, I'd been the woman who forgave. For a very deliberate night, I became the woman who stopped forgiving. By morning, I had a plan. Step 1. Take control of the money. Step 2. Secure what mattered. Step 3. Ensure the humiliation would no longer be mine alone to endure. I froze the credit cards. I emailed a divorce attorney, someone I'd saved in a bookmarks folder on a bad night months ago, and I told her the truth without sobs or girlish pleas. I packed a few things from the room I'd once called ours and put the deeds and papers onto the kitchen table like a map of our shared life I'd intended to navigate away from him with. When he stumbled in mid-morning, no mistress in tow, only the slammed doors of his own life behind him, he tried to explain. He tried the familiar script. It's not what you think. He tried to bargain and bargain again. I listened with a calm that felt colder than the hotel lobby had. "You thought you could destroy me quietly," I said. "You miscalculated." He tried to grip my wrist as I carried a box to the car. I flinched and pulled away, and the gesture that once would have sent him into contrition now only scared him. He looked smaller, raw and unglued. I drove back to the house a different kind of woman, sharp and methodical. The first sign my plan was working came 2 days later at midnight. A notification. 3 failed attempts on a card. I pictured him at the pump, sliding the plastic without the easy comfort that used to accompany his transactions. The next morning, he left me voicemails, 13 in one afternoon, each more frantic than the last. He called me all the names men do when a life they built on charm begins to crumble. Desperate, furious, beseeching. I didn't answer. The silence became its own weapon. Word moved faster than any phone call. Friends, neighbors, even his family began to sense that the man who'd always been bulletproof had cracked his first bullet. It's dangerous to believe people are always what they appear. Caliber, my husband's professional swagger, had been a performance long before the lobby. But even performances need props. I learned how to pull them away. He tried to spin it. He posted a video with a careful tone of a man who believed appearances could stitch meaning. Our marriage has been struggling, he told viewers. But the truth is more complicated. That was the version he wanted the public to swallow.
People tried.
But receipts have a stubborn way of speaking louder than speeches. Screenshots my sister had collected, late-night texts paired with credit card alerts, arrived in group chats like small detonations. The rooftop photo did the rest. Once the receipts leaked, his image began to peel away. Clients pulled back. Colleagues whispered. Mutual friends texted me confessions that made me feel small and fierce at once. He looks worse than you think. A cousin sent a single-line message, "You destroyed him," as if this collapse were some tidy result of poetic justice. I did not celebrate. I observed the consequences with an economy of motion. The world that had sustained him, small courtesies, quiet accolades, the network he'd curated, started to loosen. There were moments of cruelty I had to resist. Part of me wanted to humiliate him more, to keep the wound open until it taut. But the calm hand of planning kept me still. The court became the instrument of the next phase. Papers were filed. The judge issued temporary freezes. We fought cold and legal. The house, funded in part by my inheritance, was secured. The car was repossessed. His credit cratered. And for me, the big gain was custody of my niece, Ava, the girl who had been more like a daughter. The judge saw what the receipts showed: neglect, pattern, instability. The final orders favored me in ways that balanced more than just assets. He tried to fight back with the usual male maneuver: fabricate victimhood. He accused me of cruelty and spite, as if demanding accountability was a kind of abuse.
The court didn't buy it.
My lawyer, a precise woman who carried herself like a blade, dismantled his counterclaims with a minimal, efficient fury. When the divorce was finalized, the settlement read like a slow unwinding of everything he'd built: the house, the accounts, half of the retirement. He left with a fraction of what he'd once held. When he moved out, it was not cinematic. A beat-up truck, a few friends, neighbors watching from porches. I watched from the window, and there it was. The man who had once commanded rooms, now small and apologetic in the yard. I felt no exultation, only relief and a strange, sober justice. The life he'd imagined for himself had collapsed into something he had not practiced how to survive. Months passed. I painted the walls a color that suited me. I filled the rooms with things that were mine: plants on the sill and the soft clutter of a home lived in by two who were together by choice, not habit. I built my business back slowly, turning the marketing skills I'd sidelined into clients and paychecks in my own name. Ava applied to colleges. We celebrated each acceptance like a small private victory. The nights I once spent awake waiting for him, I now spent writing proposals or reading on the porch while birds kept time. And yet the city is a small place for gossip. I heard through the grapevine that he'd rented a one-bedroom near the freeway, that he took gigs that left him scraping for cash. People said his friends had drifted. His mother, once an apologist, stopped answering calls. There was no satisfaction in that, only the knowledge that his choices had consequences. One gray Tuesday, months after the rumble of the settlement had gone quiet, I left the courthouse after signing the last documents. My life felt settled in a new way, not healed entirely, but owned by me. I was moving through the steps with a calm that felt heavier than ease when I heard my name, shrill in the open air. "Maya," he said. His suit hung off him wrong, a faded echo, like a costume. There was a strip of humility in his voice that once would have framed my forgiveness. "Please, just hear me out." There was no reason to stop. I could have turned and walked. But a part of me, curiosity, memory, the arrogance of someone who wanted to see the uprooting up close, stayed. "You had your chances," I told him when he finally met my eyes. He tried the usual, pleas for space, promises that sounded like rehearsed lines. I watched him count the weight of what he'd lost and felt nothing softened. This was a man begging for oxygen. He had withdrawn from me without a second thought. "What do you want?" I asked. He said, "A second chance." He said, I can change. He said 1,000 small things that sounded like catching at air. When he said he'd lost everything, his voice cracked in a way that felt like a small confession. There was a moment where I saw who he could be, stripped of pretense, and wondered briefly, not for long, what it might have been like if he had chosen differently from the beginning. But that moment was almost mercifully brief. "You're the architect of your own destruction," I said. I left him with those words like a lock. I turned away and walked into the sun, as if the whole world was only mine for that step. The sky broke into light, and I exhaled a breath I hadn't known I'd been holding for years. I learned something in the months that followed. Revenge had not been the point. Exposing him had been a necessary purge, a clearing that allowed space for something else to grow. The house brightened under a new palette. My business grew slowly and with integrity. Ava left for school and called with the kind of gratitude that made the sleepless years worth the cost. I started to sleep again, but the ending was never clean. There was one last thing that hung in the air, like an unread letter: suspense. He had been ruined publicly, privately humbled, stripped of the life he'd intended to control. He lived in the margins now, days measured by smaller appetites and shrinking circles. I was supposed to feel triumphant and done. And in a way, I was. Yet even as I rebuilt, something in me stayed ready, an edge I kept sharp. Because when someone betrays you with such methodical disregard, it's not always possible to close the book on the person. You can lock doors and sign papers, but endings are practice, not fact. So I walked forward, measured and steady, with a knowledge that the story wasn't over. Not for him, not for me. And in the back of my mind, beneath the new rhythm of my days, a thread of tension remained. The possibility of return, the thing I would not allow. The suspense sat like a held breath at the end of a long sentence, waiting. Not for reconciliation, not even for revenge, but for completeness. The last scene of my life with Caleb, the loud hand in the hotel lobby, the words that cut him down at Sunday dinner, the legal unspooling, would stain his days. But it would also mark the beginning of something quiet and fierce for me, a life I had fought for and reclaimed. And yet, as I signed the last documents and set them down, sunlight lighting the paper in a bright slash, I felt the inescapable truth of stories like ours. They rarely end without an echo. There was a hush, a pause, the kind that keeps you waiting for what may or may not come next. If I had to name it, I would call it resolve, but it was also a promise of watchfulness. I had dismantled what he had built. Now I would build what I wanted. But the suspense, that stayed, like a shadow that would not fold away. The weeks after the court's final gavel had fallen felt almost alien in their stillness. For the first time in years, my mornings weren't rushed by someone else's needs. The house felt different too, lighter, freer, as if its walls were exhaling. I filled the silence with music again, not the sterile background noise he had preferred, but soft notes that made me feel alive. Ava, now accepted into her first-choice university, glowed with a confidence that made me proud. "You did this for me," she said one night while we ate takeout on the porch. "You gave me stability." I shook my head. "You did it for yourself, Ava." I only cleared the path. Yet beneath every smile, every small triumph, there was a shadow I couldn't shake. Caleb hadn't disappeared, not fully. I would catch his name whispered at a coffee shop or overhear a mutual acquaintance mention seeing him at odd places, a rundown bar, a friend's spare room, the edge of some business deal that never materialized. Each rumor reminded me that humiliation doesn't always equal finality. And then one night, the shadow moved closer. It was late, the streets of the city gleaming with rain, when I stepped out of a client's office. I had just landed a marketing contract that would have made the old me glow with the need to run home and share the good news. Now, I only smiled to myself. But then, across the street, I saw him.
Caleb.
His once pristine suits were replaced by a jacket that sagged at the shoulders, his hair unkempt, his posture bent like the weight of failure had finally settled in. He spotted me, too, and the look in his eyes was almost enough to unnerve me. Not hatred. Not even desperation. but something darker, resolve. He crossed toward me, ignoring traffic, cars honking as he cut across the wet pavement. Maya, he said, breathless, as if my name still belonged to him. I stiffened, clutching my bag. You shouldn't be here. You think you've won, he said, his voice uneven, trembling between anger and plea. But you haven't seen the whole picture. I narrowed my eyes. What picture, Caleb? The one where you lied, cheated, and destroyed everything you touched. His jaw tightened.
You don't understand.
You never did. They'll come for you, too.
They.
I repeated. But before I could ask more, he turned and walked into the night, swallowed by rain and neon. Days later, envelopes began appearing on my doorstep. No return address, each one handwritten in his distinct slant. Inside, not apologies, not pleas, but fragments. Half pages of scribbled words, references to people I didn't know, hints at debts he'd never mentioned, names underlined twice like warnings. The letters unsettled me more than his presence. They weren't love notes, nor threats. They were puzzles, cryptic phrases like, the blonde was never the problem and check the second account. At first, I considered ignoring them. But curiosity is a dangerous flame. One evening, while Ava studied for finals, I opened the third letter and noticed something odd. An account number, almost buried between words. I knew better. And yet I couldn't stop. I checked. And when I did, I found money. Hidden funds he had never disclosed in court. Thousands tucked away under a name I didn't recognize. The betrayal I thought I'd mapped out was bigger than I'd imagined. One night, as I left the grocery store, a man in a dark coat stopped me. His voice was low, steady, not frantic like Caleb's. You should be careful, he said. Excuse me? You're Maya, yes? Caleb's ex-wife. Every instinct in me screamed danger, but I forced my voice steady. Who are you? A friend. Or maybe just someone with unfinished business. He slipped a small card into my hand before walking away. No explanation. The card had only a single word scrawled across it. Soon. It was nearly midnight when my phone rang, Caleb's name flashing across the screen. I almost let it go to voicemail. But something inside me, the unresolved suspense of his letters, his cryptic warning, made me swipe. His voice was ragged, trembling. Maya, listen to me. It's not about us anymore. It's about what I got involved in. The money, the people, it's bigger than you think. You're paranoid, I said, though doubt laced my tone.
No. They know your name now.
You have to be careful. Before I could press him, the line went dead. The next morning, news broke. A car had been found near the river, burned out, unrecognizable. Witnesses claimed a man matching Caleb's description had been seen near it hours before. The police report listed it as suspicious. Nobody recovered. Some said he had died. Others whispered he had staged it. I sat at my kitchen table, Ava humming in the next room, staring at the headline until the words blurred. Relief warred with unease. I wanted to believe it was over, but deep down I knew better. Because suspense is not just about what has happened, it's about what might still be waiting. And as I slid open the latest envelope that had arrived on my doorstep, my heart froze. Inside was no handwriting, not even words, just a single photograph
of me,
standing in my own driveway, taken only yesterday.